Welcome, everybody. Joe Tarnowski with ECRM here, and I have with me today Maria Lange, who's the Vice President of Strategic Verticals, including pet and cannabis for Nielsen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Today, what we're going to talk about is pet industry trends. So we're going to focus on a few key areas, including trends during COVID, also the regrainification of the pet food, sustainability, and premiumization. So, but before we get into that, Maria, can you give a little overview of your area of practice within Nielsen?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks again for having me, and really excited to chat pet. I've actually been in the industry for nearly a decade now, so I'm very passionate about the pet industry and could talk to you and everyone for hours about the pet industry. So very excited. So basically pet and also cannabis, which I lead both at Nielsen, is a strategic vertical, really meaning that we pull in all of our solutions at Nielsen, given point of sale tracking, consumer insights, under innovation strategies, all that, really helping clients, which could be manufacturers, distributors, retailers in the pet industry, to really help them answer their business questions and help them make informed business decisions, in the pet industry. So we are really, having pet experts on the team that really don't do anything but research the pet market, really, going deep and helping clients answer their questions on an ongoing basis. So that's
Excellent.
what strategic vertical is really all about.
Well, and the fact that you also are, covering cannabis as well is helpful because later on in the year we have our pet CBD session. So we'll be able to dig into that.
Yeah, and Joe, it's interesting. Sometimes people ask me, so what do you do? And I say, I lead the pet and cannabis business at Nielsen. They're like, pet and cannabis? It's like, yeah, believe it or not. And there's quite a bit of overlap, so absolutely. It is certainly different, but, CBD actually, hemp-derived CBD has become quite a big trend in the pet industry as well over the past few years. So, and it is really potentially set to be even a bigger trend in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that ourselves because last year when we had our pet session, we had so many CBD companies, and I actually moderated a roundtable, a panel discussion of retailers, and half of the discussion was about CBD. So once we saw how big that was, we launched a specific pet CBD session to address that, and it was packed. I mean, so it is a big thing, and a lot of stuff going on in there. So COVID-19. I mean, it's impacted every single category. In fact, I spoke with your colleague Scott McKenzie a couple of weeks ago about how it's impacting mass retail. Can you talk a little bit about how that's impacted the pet category?
100%. Yeah. So actually, I think there are lots of similar trends, and then there are some that might be a little unique to the pet industry. Certainly one big trend that we're seeing is similar to what we saw like mid-March when, a lot of the states started locking down and had people staying at home, that there was a big stockpiling, going out, loading your pantry with foods, toilet paper and everything. And pet food was also included. So we saw really strong sales spikes across all retail channels for pet food in mid-March. Then saw almost, then this was true pretty much across all categories, maybe except for alcohol and a couple others. We saw a big decrease actually towards the end of March, leading into April, and that's definitely because if you looking at pet, it's a fixed consumption category. So there's your pet is not going to eat more just because you buy more food. So it's just you buy food, you stock up on it, you load the pantry, and it's going to last you just longer than you probably would have otherwise, or it would have otherwise. So certainly we saw that big spike, drop, and then as we got more into April, we saw the curve kind of climbing up again. it still to date stays below the numbers from 2018 and 2019. So certainly, that what I was mentioning, that big stockpiling, certainly that effect is continuing through throughout April and then even into May 2020. We've certainly seen it continue on. Now, certainly and again, this is probably a similarity across different categories, where we've also seen a big shift towards online. So we're seeing a lot of pet owners purchasing pet food online, obviously in addition, or either have done that before or just doing it more so now, having the opportunity to basically have the food shipped to their door where they don't have to go into a store. And certainly, there's a little bit of channel shifting going on as well, where, in terms of if you have to go into a store, where do you go shop, right? So we see, especially the pet specialties. So if you think about your mom and pop neighborhood pet shops, and even some of the big national pet specialty chains in the US, definitely being more impacted by COVID-19 and by this pandemic than some other channels. And my assumption is, so my, kind of the logic behind it, I think, is if you can skip one of the, stops at a retail shop, if you can get your pet food at a grocery store or, wherever you get your groceries for your household, and maybe potentially avoid one additional stop at a pet specialty store, people are doing that. So we're definitely looking at the numbers, year-over-year trends, definitely seeing that grocery stores, or the food, drug, and mass world, is less impacted by it than the pet specialty world. And then I mentioned one thing that may be a little different and a little unique, and that would be the pet ownership trend that we're seeing. I don't know. How about you, Joe? Like in your circle of friends or like people in the neighborhood that you talk to, but I've certainly also being part of a couple of different parent communities, people talking about having adopted a pet, looking for a pet trainer, talking about where they can adopt a pet. I had people on my team that always wanted to have a pet and now use that time to make that decision and go and adopt a pet. So we've definitely, and again, there are no hard numbers. We're actually trying out as a team to figure out how can we really put facts behind it, put some numbers behind it to measure it. But if you listen, like here and what, the news are showing, there's absolutely, I think, a spike in pet ownership happening right now, which certainly, if you think about it, could be a very big plus and a benefit for the industry long term, because obviously more mouths to feed. So we're hoping that this actually will be a good trend that will help the pet industry weather the storm of the pandemic.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I literally just experienced that firsthand last night. I hung out with a couple of friends of mine who had recently adopted a dog, and they're talking about adopting another one because they're home. It's company, and not only that, so you're seeing also. I've been seeing it. I'm sure you're seeing it. They're doing a lot more with their pets, especially people who are home, furloughed, or laid off. You're seeing all these pictures on Instagram of things they're doing with their pets. I have another friend who recently adopted one, and every day, every morning, he's posting videos of taking the dog on walks because, again, it's his time out of the house during quarantine is with his dog, because you can walk the dog and maintain social distance. And so I agree. I'm seeing that same thing. It's kind of bringing them closer. I myself do not have one because generally I travel too much. I was maybe on 30 or 35 trips last year, and I wouldn't want to do that to the dog. Always put them in a kennel. But yeah, definitely seeing that, and then also the what you mentioned about the specialty, the pet specialty. I've seen that because obviously it's happening in all the other categories. If I can make one trip, where am I going to go to get everything, including pet and food and any other pantry filling or necessities that I need, and not have to expose myself to the chance of getting something from being too many places. So yeah, so either online or minimize my number of trips so that I can reduce the exposure. I'm definitely seeing that too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you just mentioned before, also on the pet ownership piece and like people just being home, having more time, right? I think it is also, like looking long term, what we're hearing from companies that say, I think some of the big social media companies have said work from home indefinitely.
Yeah.
Maybe as you said, like, hey, I was traveling a lot, or hey, yes, I had an office job. I didn't want to, or I didn't have the additional, I didn't want to hire a dog walker or, someone to take care of my dog during the day. So maybe now, with maybe things changing going forward, people working more from home, they can actually have a dog, or they feel like, okay, now actually this makes sense, or a cat for that sake. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And also if you think about it, people being home more often and, being able to take the dogs out more often, or cats, well, maybe not the cats. Take the cats.
Some people do, but
some people do, for sure. I've seen some interesting, people with cats on leashes here in Brooklyn. It's quite interesting.
Oh, especially in Brooklyn. But we won't.
Yes.
We won't get into the whole Queens Brooklyn thing here.
No, but I think certainly, I think the pandemic is going to change everything so much in the way people behave, how they shop, how their habits, right? So I think, again, thinking of kind of how this could potentially benefit the industry. I certainly think this whole like possibly working from home more in the future could also mean, more dogs or more pet ownership in the US, or at least, a stable pet ownership trend in the future, because you'll have a lot of people also asking, there's obviously unemployment is at an all-time high, right? What does this mean? I mean, a dog or a cat is another mouth to feed in your household. So, how many households may have to abandon a dog or a cat because, for financial reasons. So, that's kind of the other side of things. But certainly in the past, we've also seen that, that dogs and cats are very, very important also for the soul, obviously. So this is it's really, there's all these benefits. And I think even if there are some that may not be able to, continue to own a dog or a cat long term, I think the spike in, wanting to have a companion during this time should, at least, offset it, going forward. So will be very interesting trend to watch.
Yeah, well, just like you have people that have service animals, comfort pets, now's a big time or a big need for a comfort pet if there is a time,
Yeah.
So,
No,
and especially, originally I see more and more people before the whole pandemic bringing comfort pets on flights. So, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves and what happens after that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned one of the other things that you brought up in your research was that regranification, right? And the issue of, and I'm going to try and pronounce this, cardiomyopathy. Did I pronounce it right? Okay.
Yep, dilated cardiomyopathy, yeah, or DCM. I think the industry, if you
that's a little easier for me.
What it stands for. But you did good.
All right, good. So talk about that. What is it? Why is it important now? And what has that done as far as changing, the food category in pet?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, DCM, I think, started first popping up back in 2018 when the FDA actually started investigating into a potential link, for grain-free foods or legume-heavy foods like peas and other, legumes that basically, they started an investigation to see if they were at all possibly be linked to DCM, to potential heart disease in dogs. Mostly large breed dogs is, kind of actually what the first research or the first report came out with. That, this is really when it started, when the industry started talking about it. And then there was a follow-up early 2019. But I think the update by the FDA that was put out actually in the summer of 2019 is really what kind of changed it and really, brought it to a peak. And that is when the FDA brought out an update that also named 16 specific dog food brands or pet food brands that basically, were making up the majority of cases of DCM. And so I think, just putting, and that's always the truth. Think of like whenever people see recall, right, and a certain brand, I mean, that's like, really, it just, does a lot of damage to a brand, obviously. And so this wasn't a recall, but it was more like, yes, the FDA is looking into this. There is potentially a link. Certainly there was no causation, like there's no real proof in either way. So it's being under investigation. It still is under investigation. It almost seems that the pandemic right now has kind of pushed it a little bit off, but certainly the industry wants answers, because what it has done is that up until that investigation starting in 2018, and then again, like the spike, as I mentioned, in 2019, grain-free foods were actually the fastest growing types of, pet foods in the industry, or for the pet retail channel. It actually was making up nearly 50% of all sales in the pet specialty channel. And I also had started really moving into food, drug, and mass, where if you were to go into a grocery store 4 or 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't find any grain-free foods, So this has certainly been like a newer trend for food, drug, and mass, but it was also a very profitable one. So because grain-free foods are usually come at a higher price than, regular traditional pet foods. So, long story short, certainly that investigation has slowed that growth. And if you kind of look at the curve, it certainly, before 2018 was still growing. And even like when the investigation started, it's kept growing. But then when that 2019 update came in, that's really when, the curve started to drop sharply. And now you almost had like and then when you mentioned regranification, you almost had like the curve for grain in foods start to climb up. So now they've crossed ways where grain-free is declining and grain-in foods are increasing. And actually, the last show, and we were all, I guess, very lucky that we got to go to Global Pet Expo in Orlando at the end of February, really just like a week before everything else pretty much shut down and all other conferences were canceled. But basically, if you were working that show floor with obviously hundreds and hundreds of booths, saw a lot of brands and a lot of brands that actually were really focused on manufacturing, marketing grain-free foods to add grain-in options to their portfolios. So you have now lots of pet foods, including ancient grains or wholesome grains, grain-friendly products. Really pet brands are really looking to see how can they bring grain back into their portfolio to really market also to these customers, consumers that are potentially scared off by DCM and looking for other opportunities, until there's more clarity. But it has really hurt the industry. And again, grain-free foods are usually, I think it was, it depends, obviously, like which brands you're looking at. They're always more premium brands, but it came at a higher price point. So if the higher price point categories hurt, certainly it's impacting the total bottom line for the industry.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the whole fat versus carb thing,
Mm-hmm.
One year it's like, okay, fats are healthy. The next year it's, oh, you got to do carb, and it goes back and forth. So, once they have more information about that, I guess we'll see which direction that it goes.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think the pandemic, everyone has, lots of things to worry about right now, especially in the pet specialty space, just like, how do we get over this and through this? Because certainly it created a lot of challenges, and e-com certainly was a challenge before, like already it was kind of a threat for the industry beforehand. Now probably even more so, and it's not going to go away. We all know that. But, I think these challenges right now that are caused through the pandemic have certainly, again, as I said, like pushed it away. But I think all of these brands, especially the ones that were named by the FDA, like they want clarity. They want to put this to bed, as you said, and really just want to move on and really figure out if there is an issue. Yes, obviously everyone wants to know, but it's really like if you kind of listen in the industry chatters, like what people are talking about when it comes to DCM. I mean, you certainly have some supporters, but there's also a lot of pushback and people and us included, like really looking for clarification of what this means and, what is safe and what's not.
Yeah, because it's got to be frustrating for some of those suppliers if it's not completely clear whether that happens, but people out of just an abundance of caution are going to avoid those products.
Yeah.
And it's not really fair, but until it's that clarification is there, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, one other trend, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this. As far as sustainability,
Mhm.
right? With the whole pandemic, people are generally taking better care of themselves. Their health is front of mind. Is that spilling over? It is spilling over to their pets, obviously, or just anything in their family, which includes pets. But sustainability is also kind of linked to that, right? Because you have healthy for us, healthy for the planet, healthy for the people who are producing, these products. Where is sustainability fitting in now, and where do you see it fitting in as we come out of this?
Great question. It certainly is a buzzword when it comes to the industry, and most of the trends we're seeing in the pet food industry have come from the human side. It's like where it's like pets are part of the family, so but it is interesting because I think up until recently, or not too long, like probably within the last 5 years or so, there hasn't been too much. We've definitely seen some tracks starting to go more towards more sustainability for the industry, but it's really starting, or we're seeing it, kind of moving where we're seeing more momentum picking up. But certainly, as I said, like it's something that you do already for yourself, or like that we do when it comes to human products that we purchase, or things we eat. Certainly, when you look into kind of what certain grocery chains have done in the past to become more sustainable, big CPG manufacturers have actually said, "Hey, we're going to get rid of plastic by 2025," or again, just different types of or if you think of like all the alternative meat options that are out now. See, that was, I think, big thing in 2019, and just getting more widely distributed. And so certainly I think the pet industry is also looking to see, this is a big trend in the human industry. How can that, or it will spill over, it has spilled over into pet, how can this be bigger? Because if you think about it, in the US, there are probably 120 million plus pets, probably more now, dogs and cats that obviously, also add to the pollution, and, it's true. And obviously eat a lot of meat. So, there have been some different studies out there, but, saying that cats and dogs, through their consumption, are absolutely adding to the impact on the environmental impact. So, there are different things that the industry is doing to see, how can pet food brands be more sustainable when it comes to packaging, or, about the whole processing of how, where the meat comes from, how it's being processed, and, where it's being sourced from, all that. But then even down to the meat itself, right? So where, does it have to be actually meat, or could it be some alternative meat options, even like lab-grown meat, which is already, it's very, very small, but there are some companies already looking into this. And then certainly one other trend that's already pretty big around the globe, but certainly is, I feel like, momentum picking up for the US pet industry, is when it comes to insects, actually, like mealworms, black soldier fly, protein, and that being used as a source for pet food. So, there's a lot going on. And I think one thing I want to mention, which makes us believe that this is going to be big, is when we look at our sustainability data from Nielsen, that basically looks at, how sustainable certain generations are, and like how willing they are to change their habits to make an environmental impact. Millennials actually are much more likely to do it than Gen X or Gen Z, or even baby boomers. So what's interesting is that, millennials are the largest pet owning population. And if they are already saying they would, consider moving towards more sustainability, we assume that that will also leak over to the pet, their pet purchasing behaviors. So definitely one to keep an eye on.
I really think that, like you mentioned, the insect protein, that's such a great opportunity. So many other countries are consuming insects in one way, shape, or form, and it's so sustainable. Even there are some cases where some vegans give insect food a pass.
Yeah.
For instance, because the net damage done to the environment in harvesting crickets, for example, is less than even harvesting plants. Because it requires less input, less space, and really the only thing harmed is the insects that are harvested for that purpose. Whereas if you're clearing a farm or land to make a farm to grow produce for vegans,
Yeah.
you're still impacting that environment. So, and you're getting so many good nutrients from that, and it's not bad. I've tried some dried crickets. I've tried some, insect chocolates and stuff, and you can't tell the difference.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a restaurant close by here that has grasshoppers on the menu. I may have tried them as well. But no, you're absolutely right though. It's like, I think overcoming that yuck factor, because if someone says like, oh, I'm feeding my dog crickets or mealworms, like it may seem not very palatable or anything, but actually if you look at the science and the research that has been done so far, it actually in some cases shows even higher palatability than some meats, and if, with higher, as you said, like they're really rich in protein, calcium, all that, and on top of obviously being very sustainable and environment friendly, and all the costs to obviously or like CO2 emission, all that, all the good stuff, and like the little water obviously you need compared to when you talk about meat production. But certainly when it comes to insect protein, when we're talking about a global trend, we're looking at like the UK, for example. Actually, the British Veterinarian Association has even, really advocated for feeding insect protein to dogs and cats because of, how good it is for them, how nutritious it is for them. So right now, the insect protein is not an improved ingredient within pet food, within dog and cat food in the US. But I think just considering kind of, where research has been at recently, that we can't be too far away from also seeing it approved, at least some type of insects in the US for dog and cat food as well. So, and there's obviously already a lot out there that's included in dog and cat treats. So it's just not in full meal, like complete and balanced meals today. But I think because it is already so big and it's so big around the globe, it can't be all that long until it's becoming a larger trend in the US as well. And then it's all education, to make it big.
I agree. And as far as palatability, I mean, half the dogs eat their own poop anyway. So it's
That's right.
They don't seem too picky in some cases. So crickets, you can flavor them or, whatever. I'm sure that, and a lot of dogs will eat bugs if they see them, So great opportunity there. And what about, the local aspect, right? Sustainability, buying local products is a component of that. Is that something that people, or at least these groups that are interested in sustainability, what's the trends there?
Actually, that's one of the, I think, sustainability trends we've been observing for a while in the pet industry, where it's certainly, you have packaging where it says, this cow or this turkey came from this location in the US. So being very specific, like be traceable, saying, okay, transparency, this is where the ingredient, the protein came from. And, people, manufacturers really looking to see how can they be more sustainable by sourcing local products. Same with, fish, where you have the MSC, so the Maritime steward councilship, where that's also like really looking into, having fish that's, obviously, sustainably sourced. There's definitely been a trend where it's more regional, local. I mean, you have some in the national chain, some of these kitchens that are included in a big pet store, where you can basically pick up your fresh food right there, where it doesn't even have to travel. Like, it's cooked more or less in front of you. Mm-hmm. You take it home. So that's another way of showing like how the carbon paw print is being reduced, and how we're just looking, or the industry is looking to see, looking at the different ways of doing it, and local and regional ingredient sourcing has been a trend, and continues to be a trend.
And then strong messaging has got to go hand in hand with that, letting everybody know. Yeah,
it's part of your brand mission, right? Your brand identity. Like, it really helps. And again, like thinking, I'm a millennial. I'm outing myself, but absolutely. If I can support a regional or a local brand, I'm going to do that. It feels good. It's that feel good moment, right? Like, or like, ethical, feeling good. Like, it's definitely that it creates that. And so, if I find like something from a New York farm, or, going to the farmer's market here to support businesses, absolutely. I know I'm down for it. And again, looking kind of what the data shows as a whole, I kind of fit right in. And
you're a case study in the millennial market.
That's right.
Well, the other thing is, I think the issues that we've seen with the whole pandemic, in us having trouble getting things because ingredients were from overseas, has kind of pushed that envelope a little more, where we're like, what, we need to start making more stuff here, so that we don't run out, or we're not dependent on other countries that might run out, or if it's needed, we're not going to get what we need. So I think that might play into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think it was already a trend, as you said. It was a trend that already had happened, and now I think it's just going to get stronger going forward.
Speaking of trends that have been kind of on the rise, premiumization is one of them. I know we've discussed that last year, or at our session when I moderated the panel of retailers. That was one of the topics. And now with this raw foods and things like that, what's happening in that realm?
I think premiumization has never really stopped. It's continuing on, and certainly that's part of that humanization trend, right? Being like your dog eats as well, or sometimes even better than you might eat yourself. Same for the cat. So, like, I mean, if you look out there, at some point, we had a lot of exotic proteins coming into the pet world, like foods with kangaroo or boar, or all these exotic proteins, like novel proteins to dogs and cats. And so, but it obviously not just from a protein perspective, but also the type of pet food, right? So the days of where you would just open a can and give this to your dog or cat, or obviously the traditional kibble, we've moved way beyond that, where there are freeze-dried pet foods, air-dried pet foods that go through a very, complicated, long process to basically, to get to a raw alternative type of kibble that pet owners feed to their pets. And certainly, again, this is like obviously making the kibble more nutritious, more protein-rich, more palatable through these very premium offerings. But again, it's like a very costly manufacturing process. So obviously that's also then, shows in the price you pay for that food. And, I think what the industry has done, and this is certainly a trend for, I think, about 5 years now when it started, where, taking these freeze-dried or air-dried components and putting them into, like, mixing them with a kibble. So you have what we call, like, in the industry, kibble plus, right, where it's basically either a kibble that's coated with a freeze-dried coating, or a kibble that has freeze-dried pieces or air-dried pieces mixed in, so that your dog can get a combination, almost like an upgraded kibble experience, if you will. But still, like where it doesn't break the bank of committing to just freeze-dried or air-dried food, or dehydrated food. So there are all these different types of alternative pet foods that are continuing to grow. Absolutely, if you're looking at the industry, especially in the pet specialty space, that is hurting to an extent now, obviously because of the pandemic. But even before, so the growth of e-com has certainly put a lot of pressure on traditional brick and mortar, independent brick and mortar. But if you're looking at what's driving growth, it's those raw alternative pet foods. It's also the frozen and like the raw foods, the fresh foods. So all these premium offerings for both dry and wet foods that are really driving the growth for these, for these, especially for these specialty retailers, and are offsetting, the declines coming from the more traditional types of foods. So, definitely continuing, and I wouldn't be too surprised. I mean, maybe a little bit of a hurdle to overcome right now, especially as maybe unemployment may put a little pressure on the wallets here and there. So perhaps, some that may have mixed in freeze-dried or air-dried or dehydrated foods or frozen foods as an kind of a treat, if you will, might be doing this a little less, or some that may have done the jump may switch back. Like, it's a little early for us to tell right now, but certainly I know our team is going to look at very, very closely, like what consumers are doing long term. Are they, how they're switching? Are they staying? Are they sticking? Are they loyal to their brand, or are they going to switch around to kind of get a little relief on their spending?
Well, that's fine. You read my mind, because that was the last question I was going to ask you. Is with all these people out of work and financial insecurity, how is that going to impact premiumization? Plus there's another option, right? So, and again, like you said, it is too early to tell, but, so they may trade down a little bit, or I'm wondering, are they going to sacrifice their food to keep that high level premiumization? So maybe they'll get cheaper stuff for themselves, trade down, get more value in the human food, so that their pets can live in the manner to which they're accustomed.
It's very possible. Heard that before. I think actually at a trade show, someone was saying like, okay, their pet was eating some like really like, let's call it $5 per pound kind of dog food, and then they were driving up to like a fast food chain to buy a burger or something like that, them for themselves. Certainly, and it's true. I mean, again, like I'm a mom, and I want to make sure my daughter eats as good as possible. And if I would never, like, if I had financial restraints, I would never cut back on her, nutrition. So I think, or I would try as hard as I could to not, impact that. So again, lots of pets are seen as their, a lot of families or a lot of pet owners see their pets as their children, as part of the family. So your comment there, I think, is absolutely, there's truth to it. And I think there are a lot of households that would do exactly what you said, like, cut back on your own nutrition before you cut back on your dog's or cat's nutrition. And obviously we know it's hard to change a dog's or a cat's food. It's easy. You have to rotate them out and bring in the new food very slowly. But if your pet likes a certain food, right, then you may not want to mess with that. And so, yeah, maybe it's kind of the last resort. But yeah, we are very curious to see where that's going to go and how that's all going to change or not change over the next few months.
Well, we'll have to do a follow-up on, a few months down to see how all this plays out. And I think another interesting thing that we could explore would be examining the parallels between pets and babies and infants, and kids, and see, since they are part of the family, let's see how they, I wonder, I would guess a lot of the trends are kind of parallel with each other. So,
yes, I would agree.
I think so. I'm not a parent, but you are, so you'll have to let me know. But Thank you so much for all the information. Again, we will do a follow-up because, I think it would be good to really kind of track and see how this is played out. And,
Sure.
we will have, I'll have some information or a link to your area on Nielsen's site in case anybody wants some additional information. But thank you again for all that
Thank
information,
you.
and
And I
stay
look
safe.
forward, yeah, absolutely, you too. And let me know. I heard, like you mentioned, the Pet CBD conference or event. So hit us up there as well, because that's where the two come together. So we'd love to chat there as well.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
already have your green paper, so
there you go. And
we
I'm
will we'll
in the
definitely.
room, as you can see. So I'm
Yes,
ready.
right. It's perfect. It's perfect for your coverage. So thanks
That's right.
again, and
Thank
we
you,
will
Joe.
we will definitely do a follow up.
Wonderful. Stay safe. Thank you.
Okay, you too.